Good afternoon. We're back for the next section of the mystery lightning at 200 Durham Street. I think last week I mentioned that we're revising the covers of the books. There's the old cover on the original, and here's the new one. I like the newer one, but I also like the old one. But that's what's happening. In the story, we finally have everyone back in town. You remember that Chief Petrovic and Detective O'Neill had gone to Ottawa to do some interviews there, and they arrived back on the Saturday and saw the debris from the great storm. And of course, we know that Joel had his new ability because he was struck by lightning, and he practiced that for a while. He had to get used to what he could do. And of course, he had to keep it a secret, because if he started telling people that he could talk to the dead, there's no doubt that he soon would end up not at home, but rather in a small padded room. So that's where we left the story the last time. So now we're heading into June, and Joel and his friends are pretty excited because the school year is coming to an end. I don't know whether you remember much about school years coming to an end or not. Depends on your age. I remember, and it was always a very exciting time. So they're trying to make some plans, and they do come up with a plan. And on Wednesday, following what's happened after the storm, Joel and his friends, Jay and Sylvia and Georgia, were talking about celebrating the end of the school year. They want to do something special. Sylvia comes up with the idea of maybe having a family picnic out at the cabin in the bush, because that's still very much on their minds. Well, the four friends talk about it, but they know this is going to be a tough sell to their parents. So a family meeting is arranged. And that Friday night, which will be a couple of days later, it's a beautiful evening, and the families of Joel, Jay, George, and Sylvia have gotten together, okay, to discuss this idea that their teenage children have come up with. Joel's mom was very concerned. She knew Joel worked very hard at school the past year, and she was proud of his achievements. And so she wanted to reward him, but at the same time, she was concerned about this plan. So let's see what happened. The meeting was taking place at Jay's parents' home. They had a large private backyard, and they were looking forward to this. Jay's mom took great pride in her flowers and shrubbery. It was a very pleasant place to be. The meeting started with Jay stating the case for returning to the cabin. He said, "Joel and I don't have nightmares, but we sure have recurring unpleasant memories. We think if we went back to that place and had a picnic, in other words, we're going to have a good time at that place, that they would remember it differently. No longer would it be quite as terrifying an experience as they had." Well, Jay was very eloquent, and you could see the effect it had on the parents. "I'm a little concerned about you going out there," Joel's dad said, "but I think you should do it." "I don't disagree with you, but I don't know how you're going to convince the chief of police it's okay to go back to the scene of a murder," said Sylvia's mom. "Well," said Joel's dad, "give me 2 weeks. Let me see if I can convince the chief." Well, the women said. Just remember, we need enough time to get ready for the picnic. Of course, that caused everyone to laugh. So that was the important business part of the meeting, and they then went and had some snacks. So it was a week later. The chief and his constables and Inspector O'Neill, or Detective O'Neill, are having a meeting at the police station. And at the end of the meeting, the chief says, "I've got one other item of business to bring forward." He said, "I have a request from Joel Franklin and Jay Jarvis." He said, "You know, these boys acted in a very mature fashion when they discovered the body of that woman in the cabin. It wasn't an easy thing to handle. Joel's dad, Arthur, has been a spokesperson for the families. He came into my office a few days ago and said he'd like to talk to me about a request that the two boys had asked their parents about." Well, I asked him if he'd come back at 4 o'clock, and he asked me if 4:30 would be okay. And so we agreed, and he came back. And at the meeting we had in my office here at the police station, Mr. Franklin told me that the families had met last weekend. The two boys had told them that they were struggling with memories of the body they found in the cabin. I guess today we'd be thinking a little about PTSD, trauma that had upset them. And they thought if they went back to the scene of that upset and had a good time there, having a picnic, that perhaps they'd feel better about those memories of that site. Well, the chief said my initial reaction to Mr. Franklin's request was, "I don't want anybody near that site." But I didn't say anything. My wife has told me on several occasions that if I stop and think about it for a day, I'll see a different point of view. I actually listened to that advice from my wife, because I've learned from experience that her suggestions are usually wise. Now, after 2 days, I'm beginning to think it's not that bad an idea. "I don't think they can hurt the crime scene," said Detective O'Neill. "I think we found everything that there is to find. It's been almost 4 weeks since the start of our investigation." "I think you're okay to be in agreement with the request, sir," Constable Herman said. "I just think it needs to be done very quietly. We don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there at that cabin. We want people to think that they still shouldn't be going there." Well, they're talking about going out there to celebrate the July the 1st holiday, the chief said. And that might work out because there are a lot of other things going on at that time, and I think most people will be involved in other activities. He looked around the table and said, "Do you think I should give them permission?" And everyone was nodding in agreement that he should. He said, "Fine, I'll contact Mrs. Ruth Carter. She does own the land. We have to ask her." And the meeting ended. So, what's going to happen? They're going back to the scene of the crime. Now, there's bound to be something going on there, but we'll find out. The other thing that has happened is that the chief and Detective O'Neill have been doing interviews. And in the course of those interviews, they've interviewed Alice Chalmers a few times. And in the middle of one of those interviews, something interesting occurred. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, let's see what that's about. So they just about finished the interview when suddenly Alice said, I just thought of something. Someone from her past. And it was kind of an unhappy experience. The person wasn't pleased with Louise at all. Well, the chief looked up from his notes because this was coming out of the blue and said, well, tell us about this. So Alice said, you know, there was a man who had a romantic interest in Louise. This is the first we've heard about this. She talked to me about him a couple of different times when we met in Chaseford for dinner. Unfortunately, she never told me his name or exactly where he lived, but I'll tell you what I can about him. I know she met him when she was a university student. At that time, she was finishing her degree, and he was a young faculty member. She told me that he was absolutely brilliant. He'd won all kinds of awards. Louise went out on a couple of dates with him, but found out that he was very self-centered and very controlling. She decided she wanted nothing more to do with him and refused to go out with him again. Well, he didn't take kindly to the rejection. He harassed her to some extent, so much so that she had difficulty completing her final year. Once she completed her degree, she couldn't wait to leave Toronto. This all happened at the U of T. Well, he must have lost track of her or developed other romantic interests because she didn't see or hear from him again until after her father died. Of course, her father was a politician, and there was a lot of information in the newspapers at the time of his death. After that, after his death was reported, Louise received a letter from this man who extending his sympathy. And he requested that she meet him for a meal at Ottawa's finest restaurant. She didn't answer the letter. He sent her one letter a week for the next month. Boy, these days with the communication we have now would be one letter an hour via one form of media or another. But at that time, one letter a week would have been an awful lot. So she wanted nothing to do with him, and she wrote that she'd kept the letters, and that if she received another letter from him, she would inform the police. That stopped the letters. I don't know whether it would stop the emails. And she thought her problem had been solved. Then about 4 years ago, she unexpectedly received a letter from him again. He told her he was friends with someone who knew her well, friends with someone who had been to her cabin in the woods. Now, that was a scary thought, because Louise was terrified he'd come to the cabin. So she sent a note to him, telling him that he was not to appear at the cabin. Well, he must have got the message because he didn't appear at the cabin. Well, that was about all that Alice knew, so she ended her comments about this fellow there. And then Detective O'Neill looked at her and said, he sounds like a very dangerous man. It's unfortunate we don't know his name or his address. We do know that he lives or lived near London, Ontario, but so do thousands of other people. So they're not sure how they're going to pursue this. So they thought about it for a while and left it at that. So far today, we found out two important things. We found out that the families are going back to the cabin in the bush where the murder occurred. And we also found out that there's another suspect in the murder of Louise Carter, the woman who was murdered at the cabin. Things seem to be coming together a bit in this case. One other thing here. Later that afternoon, Petrovic and O'Neill were still at the police station, and they got a phone call, and they were informed that the fingerprints didn't match Proctor. The fingerprints on the bottle and that they found didn't match Proctor and didn't match Bella. So that wasn't the best news, because there are two other suspects and the fingerprints aren't pointing in the right direction. Well, they didn't know what to do next. I guess they'll figure it out though, because I'll be telling you more of this story next time. The other thing I wanted to mention at this time is my latest book is out. Just came out yesterday. And who's crazy? Well, if you look at that guy, it looks like he has a split personality. But that book is out now. You can get it at Amazon. I think it's a good book. One person must have read it already, because I got a note earlier today, just around lunchtime, saying they enjoyed the book. And this book, this is the 8th book in the series. The book I'm reading to you now is just the first book. This is the 8th book, and this time, at the beginning of the book, the young detective Joel Franklin takes advantage of an opportunity and joins the London police force, and this is where he encounters this psychopath. Thank you.